welcome you all. My name is Kirstin Noreen. I am the professor and chair of art history, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our talk today, our roundtable on reclaiming David Drake, the legacy and restitution of Drake's ceramic art. I'd like to thank you for coming to Murphy Recital Hall for this exciting panel, and I would like to thank especially Dean Alexander in the back of the room for his support of our KaleidoLA Lecture Series. And this series is one that allows us to have important conversations that bring scholarship and pedagogy and public engagement into meaningful dialogue. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that LMU is located in on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Tongva people. We recognize the Tongva as the original caretakers of this land and honor their enduring presence, histories, and cultural contributions. This acknowledgement invites us to reflect on the broader histories of dispossession and resilience that shape the place where we gather today. And I think this is particularly important given the topic of today's roundtable as well. This is a roundtable that is sponsored by the Department of Art and Art History. KaleidoLA is a speaker series that brings in artists, art historians, and also helps to explore how art and visual culture intersect with other fields. Today's roundtable reflects that focus by examining the intersections of art history with law, historical research with contemporary ethical questions, and classroom learning with public impact. By placing artistic practice, scholarly research, and legal expertise in conversation, today's KaleidoLA Roundtable creates a space for the discussion of complex issues surrounding art, such as authorship, ownership, restitution, and historical accountability. These conversations closely align with LMU's mission of social justice, ethical responsibility, and the pursuit of knowledge in the service of the common good. At the center of today's discussion is David Drake, also known as Dave the Potter, an enslaved 19th century ceramic artist whose work is extraordinary, not only for its technical mastery, but also for the fact that Drake signed many of his works and often included also inscribed poetry. These inscriptions are acts of authorship and self-assertion that challenge longstanding assumptions about whose voices are preserved in American art history and whose are erased. And as we'll hear, today's conversation is not only, though, about the past, it's very much about the present, and about provenance research, about legal responsibility, restitution, and the ethical obligations of museums, scholars, and institutions. The recent and successful restitution of Drake's ceramic vessels from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston to Drake's heirs represents a landmark case. And this is a case that I just want to underscore has very important implications that extend far beyond a single artist or a single institution. And that's something that I'm sure will be coming out today. This is a case that forces us to really ask difficult questions about ownership and recognition and repair, and about how we acknowledge histories that are shaped by violence and dispossession while working towards a more sort of just future. Now, we're fortunate to have an exceptional panel, a group of speakers who bring together distinct but deeply connected perspectives to this conversation. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Melody Rod-ari, Associate Professor of Art History here at LMU. She received her PhD from UCLA and previously served as a curator of Asian art at the Norton Simon Museum. Dr. Rod-ari is also the Southeast Asian content editor for Smart History. Her research not only examines Buddhist art in Southeast Asia, but also focuses on the histories of collecting and display, as well as the repatriation of South and Southeast Asian art from American and European museums. These are themes that directly link into our talk today. We'll then hear from George Fatheree, a nationally recognized attorney, justice capitalist, and social impact entrepreneur, a graduate of Harvard, and shout out LMU's Loyola Law School from 2007. He's also a member of LMU's Board of Trustees. He's achieved historic and groundbreaking work across law, social justice, and cultural preservation. He made history by securing the return of Bruce's Beach to the heirs of the family from whom it was taken through racially motivated eminent domain. You may have heard about that very, very important case in Manhattan Beach. This is the first such restitution in US history, so very, very important case as well. As a champion of social justice, his award-winning pro bono work includes securing reparations for Holocaust survivors and advocating before the California Supreme Court for students with disabilities. Our third panelist is Ryan Maroun, an LMU alumnus who earned his BA in art history in May 2025, a recent grad. Following his graduation, Ryan worked as a researcher and art historian on this project, contributing extensively to provenance research and to the development of what is now the most comprehensive catalog of David Drake's work, a very significant accomplishment. His experience illustrates how training in art history can translate directly into professional research and cultural heritage work beyond the undergraduate classroom. So after these presentations, I'll have the pleasure to be able to moderate questions. So I hope that you save up all of your burning questions for that time, and that you'll join me now in welcoming our panel.
Thank you so much, Kirstin, for the introductions, and thank you to everyone for being here today. I know Fridays are always difficult. Let me just go through my slides. It is truly my pleasure to be here today to talk about the amazing work that both George and Ryan have done. I cannot emphasize enough what George's successful restitution of David Drake's ceramic works means to the field of art history and art restitution and repatriation. It has set a new precedent and marks the first time that museums, and specifically the MFA in Boston, has resolved an ownership claim for works of art that were wrongfully taken under the conditions of slavery. So again, this is historic. While George's efforts to reclaim Drake's legacy and work began 4 years ago, the art history department here at LMU became involved last spring. So this time last year, you guys, when then Chair of Theater Arts and Faculty Senate President, Professor Leon Wiebers, put me in contact with George, who was actively looking for a summer intern. As George explained it, he wanted to provide a paid internship opportunity to an LMU student to research the work of David Drake. This was an amazing opportunity, not only for one of our students to have the chance to work with an accomplished lawyer, a member of the Board of Trustees, an alumnus, but also it would allow our students to cut their teeth on important provenance work. When George described to me what he was looking for this project, I immediately thought of Ryan. Ryan was then a graduating senior in art history, and more importantly, right, not only was Ryan a really strong researcher, but he was someone who really thinks critically and creatively. And this is really important when doing provenance work, and this is because you really have to think outside of the box. Most information is often hidden, or it's not located where you think it should be. So these were skills that I knew that Ryan had from many years of interacting with him and coming to my office hours. So beyond connecting George and Ryan and meeting Ryan minimally over Zoom last summer, I can't take any credit for this project. But I am enormously proud of the work that Ryan did for George. So I'm really here as another voice to introduce these two exceptional men, but also to nag all of you students who are sitting in the audience today, which is to say, go to office hours, okay? Talk to your professors. Work hard every day because we notice, right? And when opportunities come up, we want to be able to connect you with those opportunities. First and foremost, go to office hours. I'm usually sitting by myself with my sad lunch. Okay, so before we get to George and Ryan's talks, I want to briefly introduce to you the history of Edgefield pottery, which some of you may or may not know about. I certainly did not know anything about Edgefield pottery before this project began, and I had never heard of David Drake. So I thank you, George, for introducing me to this artist, but really introducing the greater population to this artist as well by highlighting his work through your own work. So what I'm showing you here right now is a map from 1825. It is a map of the Edgefield district in South Carolina. Edgefield was famous for its ceramics. Its location with abundant streams and rivers produced rich mineral clay deposits. In fact, clay from Edgefield was so well regarded that it was shipped to England to be used in Wedgwood pottery. By the early 19th century, Abner Landrum, through a series of experiments, developed alkaline glaze for pottery in Edgefield. Now, alkaline glaze is composed primarily of wood ash, clay, and a silica source. Now, in Edgefield, this meant that the silica source was lime paste, which was abundantly found. This combination can withstand high temperature firings and produces a durable green, brown, drippy finish, as you see here in these slides. And this proved to be enormously important and lucrative because the public was just beginning to learn about the dangers of lead glaze, which was the predominant glaze in domestic ware at this time. So with the introduction of alkaline glaze, this is really a healthier alternative, right? And Edgefield became a center for domestic pottery production, and to meet the demands of consumers, kilns and their owners relied on slave labor. In the 19th century, the population of Edgefield was predominantly represented by slaves. There were probably 3 times as many slaves as there were white people living there, and the majority of the artisans working in these pottery kilns were slaves. And we know virtually nothing about them. And part of this is because such documents of achievement were not recorded for slaves, whereas the history of their ownership was. Now, the accomplishments of white potters were certainly known. Not only did they sign their pots, but their achievements were also recorded. So one such example you're seeing here is the master potter Thomas Chandler, whose works were inscribed by him, but whose biography is also known at this time. Moreover, right, the reason why we don't know much about these artisans who were slaves is because the majority of them were illiterate at this time and did not sign their works. South Carolina enacted its first anti-literacy laws in 1970, and by the 19th century, it had become illegal for slaves to learn to read and write. And not only were the slaves punished, but so were their owners by monetary compensation. Now, to date, I'm not going to speak about Drake very much because I really want to leave that to George and to Ryan, but I just wanted you to see some of Drake's work. So to date, there are 29 known signed works by Drake that include poetry. And I want us to look at this example that is now housed at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. It is the earliest dated and signed work with a poem. Notice that it is inscribed with the date that you'll see here, in which the jar was produced. It tells us it was produced on January 29th, 1840. And below that, you'll see the names L. Miles and Dave. L. Miles refers to not only the factory owner where this jar was made, but also the owner of the enslaved man, Drake himself. Now, David Drake, right, we now know him today as David Drake, but he was known for a very long time as Dave the Potter. He took on the last name Drake after the Civil War, and that refers to his first slave owner. Okay, so he had actually multiple slave owners, one of which was, sorry, I forgot his name, Labner, who came up with hackle and glaze, and also Lewis himself. Now, on the other side of this jar, you guys, you'll see a poem inscribed by David Drake, and it reads, "Ladies and gentlemen's shoes, sell all you can and nothing you'll lose." So this makes reference to the other businesses that Lewis oversaw, which were leather tanning and making shoes as well. Okay. So this poem is an insight to Drake's sense of humor and also his lyricism in the face of hardship. The jar itself, as you can see, I'll go back, is made with 2 handles. Now, this, coupled with its large size, it measures nearly 18 inches tall, is actually really difficult to make. It's hard to craft a jar with 2 handles, as you see here, but also a jar that will remain intact. So this gives you a sense of his craftsmanship as a potter. A jar such as this would have likely held molasses or other type of liquid goods. The work of David Drake, as you see here, an enslaved Black man who was literate and who signed his work, is an important record of history. It is also a testament to his bravery. He chose to document his literacy in a time when such acts were considered illegal. So this is my very brief introduction to some of David Drake's work, and I really want to use the rest of the time to talk about the important work that George and Ryan did. So I'm going to leave it to them, but I'm going to leave up this slide, which you see here, of a jar that is housed at the MFA in Boston under the David the Potter Legacy Trust, LLC, and I'll let George talk more about that. Thank you.
Kick off? Okay. Thanks everybody for spending your Friday afternoon here. And before I start, I want to underscore a couple of comments that have been made. The first is this transaction that Ryan and Melody and I worked on that resulted in this jar being owned by the great, 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 great grandchildren of David Drake is nothing like this has ever happened in the art or restitution world before. That's been said. This was landmark. It's not a coincidence that the team that's responsible for this landmark achievement is a team with roots here at Loyola Marymount University. When you think about the rigorous quality of the education that LMU instills, when you think about the quality and the expertise of the faculty, and when you intersect that and overlap that with the strong call to social justice, with our intellectual curiosity, not only is it not a coincidence that an LMU team is responsible for this, you kind of think that it couldn't have happened anywhere else. So I wanted to start with that and let, for the students that are here listening, like, this is a special place, and it's a place that results in things that have never happened before, that have like profound and meaningful and hopefully long-lasting social good and social impact. So thanks. Let me talk just super briefly about how I got involved with the case, because there's some lessons in there, especially, and I'm talking mostly to the students. I know we have a mixed group, but there's some lessons in there about like how you think about your academic career, how you think about your professional career, what types of opportunities you say yes to. But you know, as mentioned, I had the tremendous privilege and honor of leading the Bruce's Beach case, which is the first time in our country's history the government's returned land to an African-American family. And once the Bruce family got that land back, I started getting emails and phone calls every day, like hundreds of emails and phone calls, mostly from African-American families, but not all, like a little, everybody looking for legal help to reclaim stolen, lost land that they lost for fraud, intimidation, violence. And unfortunately, what I realized is that our legal system provides no generally provides no remedy for that. And so what that means is like there was nothing I can do for these hundreds and hundreds of people who were calling. And it's a very frustrating situation to be in because these are people who like have known their whole life that they had something that was taken from their grandparents, and then they heard about a family getting it back, and they see like a glimmer of light, and they reach out, and I have to explain there's nothing I can do. And a lot of these families had like reams and reams of data and evidence and documentation and proof. And those were the situations where it was especially frustrating not to be able to provide any relief or support. And so, after a few months, it was tough to even continue to take the calls. But one day I got a phone call from a former law partner who was a mentor and a dear friend. And he said, hey, I need a favor. I've got a good friend, her name's Kwanzaa, and she wants to talk to you about something in her family. And of course, I know what she wants to talk about, right? And I told him, I said, look, there's nothing I can do. Like there's no legal. And he goes, look, as a favor to me, please just talk to her. I said, of course. So she called, and we had a conversation. And what she said was, we were at a family reunion, and a bunch of us cousins started talking, and somebody said that our grandmother owned some land, and it got stolen. And she goes, I want to see if you can help us get it back. And so I asked her, I said, well, like, do you know, like the circumstances surrounding the land being stolen? And she said, no, we don't know anything about that. I said, well, do you know like what time period this was? She said, no, we don't know. I said, do you know where the land was? She goes, no, we don't know. So I'm like, there's people that have like mountains of documents and proof and evidence, and I can't help them. And she didn't know like what county or state the land was in. So I'm getting not frustrated, but like, kind of impatient. And so we're hanging up the phone, and as we're hanging up, she goes, Attorney Fatheree, I got one more thing I want to ask you about. Like, she goes, we were recently contacted by a genealogist who said that one of our ancestors was somebody called David Drake, who made this famous powder. And she started telling the story, Melody, that you introduced. And when she started talking about that, like, my interest popped up. I had done kind of real estate and land work, and we had created, a precedent there. I'm passionate about art and collecting, and so I guess I start with, and so that's how I ended up learning about David Drake, and that's how I ended up taking the case was, and so I mentioned that because you'll be at school, you'll be at work, you'll be busy, you have a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of times it pays off to like take that phone call, and a lot of times it pays off to listen to what's going on there. So that's how I got involved in the case. I'll mention, I want to talk about the work that Ryan and I did together, but I'll mention another part of this process that was fascinating, and that was, it was the opportunity to learn about about history and about like stuff that we haven't learned about. So if I asked people in the room, when you think of 19th century slave economy in the United States, like, what industries do you think of? What products do you think of? People would say like what? Like, give me a couple. Agriculture specifically, cotton, what else? We smoke it. Tobacco, right? Like, so you think of cotton, you think of tobacco. This was a huge part of America's slave economy. Why? You had plantations that had dozens and dozens and hundreds of enslaved men and women and children, and you had no refrigeration, and you had no way to durable way to store food to feed these people. And so this was a critical part of America's slave economy. Like, these pots now, we're going to talk about, they're at museums, they sell at auction. They were not created as art. These were utilitarian, vessels. This was like the first refrigerator, basically, or a Ziploc bag. And so you get to learn about stuff like that. As I learned about, and so Melody talked about the jars that Drake created. He died in probably the 1870s, and very little was known about his descendants. What we do know is, starting around the 1990s, his work was discovered, and it was discovered because of the writings that he put on them that are, these short rhyming couplets that are multi-level. And so the very first word he ever wrote on a jar, other than his name, so he would sign the date and write Dave, but the first jar where he wrote the word concatenation. It's a word I had to look up. It's a word that, like, I didn't know what it means, and it's a word that, like, the white people living in the Edgefield district in the 1830s and 40s, you can bet that they didn't know what it meant. If you look up the word, what it means is like links of a chain, to be bound in a chain, or links that hold something together. And what we see very early on is, like, he's using code, right? He's got like an intellectual capacity that, like, surpasses everyone in that community. And he's using it to, like, initially, like, write words that nobody understands. But what he's talking about, like, his condition of enslavement. He goes on, and there's other, two-line couplets. And we'll talk about some of the other ones. But this was someone who was very sophisticated, but also kind of knew and understood the rules of the game, and knew that, like, he was enslaved. He was property of someone else. It was, as you pointed out, it was illegal to teach slaves to read or write. And so, anyway, starting in the 1990s, the art community starts to discover these works. And they're collected by museums and collectors and institutions. And so what you see is, like, a whole economy that develops where collectors are making money from his work, museums are, auction houses are, everyone except his descendants. And so when I got involved, like, that's how we framed the problem that we were trying to solve, is how do we create a model where Dave, who never had the ability to, like, benefit from the fruits of his labor, how do we create a model where his descendants could? And critical to that effort was understanding where his works are, who owned his works, how many were out there, and that's where the collaboration with Ryan came in. So I'll pause, and we'll see if there's other questions, and we can talk more about the project.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and fill in some of my experience. I think it was nice, very kind of Melody to reach out to me. I think it was last year at the Art and Art History Awards, making me aware of this project. And then through the next couple months, we touched base over Zoom, and I think Melody kind of set me off on the track to start discovering these works. And my job was to put together institutional histories of not only restitution and repatriation, but also the works that they had of Drake's. And the first thing that stood out to me in that research is discovering that there was no precedent to the restitution of works to the family of an enslaved person. There's plenty of history on Nazi provenance research, Nazi-era provenance research, and that restitution. Even a little bit of African art has been restituted to the countries, but this is, again, I want to underscore that this is the first of its kind. This work is the first of its kind. But I was able to, through a lot of research, put together a complete institutional catalog of every work that's owned by every museum, a partial catalog of, at least what I could find, of private collections, and then as exhaustive as I could be on auction histories and market research. And that probably spans the last 15, 20 years, and I was looking at the numbers today again, and in total, his work has sold for and made other people a little over $5 million, split between the sellers, the buyers, and the auction houses themselves. But to think that none of that went to the actual maker himself and his family it's unfathomable, and it's really, really nice to know that it's now going back to the family. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, I was kind of let loose a little bit. So I definitely had to kind of lean back on my LMU education. Melody definitely sent me on the right course. I made a huge Excel document, one that definitely was tough on my computer. I had to get a new laptop to try and run it. And I know we had some trouble kind of sending it back and forth because it was so large. But yeah, I mean, and I mean, I guess to speak on Melody's point of going to office hours, I think I was selected for this because I did bother Melody quite a bit. I never had a class with her, but I always tried to set up a quarterly meeting with her, not just because of her being the chair of the department at the time, but also she has an amazing resume, and to learn from somebody like that is amazing. But just talk to your professors is my word of advice. Get in people's faces. You can learn as much as you want. There's a lot out there that's not given to you, and if you just ask, it will be presented to you. But yeah, and working with George.
Wait, no, go ahead.
And working with George, we didn't really talk directly necessarily to begin with, but as the project was developing, I would certainly get a couple calls from you asking about certain pieces, where they were, who had the most, and kind of certain institutions and looking at what kind of work they had. But, you know, I feel really blessed to have worked on this project in the way that I did.
I want to share why Ryan's piece of the work was so imperative. When I started working with the Drake family, it was a different presidential administration than we have today, and this was, you know, kind of a couple of years after, George Floyd and Joe Biden was in office, and there was this sense of was this sense of like atonement's not the right word, but really of repair, of reparation, of kind of looking towards racial reconciliation, racial justice. So like when I started representing family, that was the environment. That environment changed very quickly with the change in presidential administration. And the first policy change we had was a change that like really looked to like make it illegal to to advance causes that are based on race. It was an administration that looked at like erasing parts of history and culture. I served on the board of the National Portrait Gallery, part of the Smithsonian in Washington D.C. And one of the first things we had to do was like the federal government sent us a letter and said, we don't want you to use this type of language when you're talking about this part of history. So it's a very different political environment. And, how many institutions, like 23, 24,
Mm-hmm.
like, so 23 or 24 institutions, museums that hold this work. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to like get the first one right, how the first one like sets the precedent and sets the tone. If we would have gone after the first one and had an unsuccessful experience, it just creates, like, it puts you in a hole that like, and we're already in a hole, so it puts you deeper down. So what was critical was like, not just going out and asking museums like, hey, would you give this back? And it was a very strategic consideration, and it was Ryan's kind of work and analysis and research that really allowed me to be able to pick an institution. And look, I'll share the strategy. Given the change in the political environment, we knew that we could not rely on like a Black Lives Matter kind of Black justice. Like that was going to have like zero. And so the strategy we had to come up with was really a strategy based on kind of precedent and kind of equity. And the Museum of Fine Art Boston, which I think is one of the finest museums in the country, has a very long and distinguished history of engaging in acts of ethical restitution. So that's when the museum's got something that has a break in the chain of title, that doesn't have clean provenance, that was taken under duress or was stolen. And so Museum Fine Art Boston has really led the way in terms of U.S. institutions, in terms of researching what it has in its collection. And if there's an indication that this arrived at the museum, not because the museum did something, but like 3 owners ago acquired title to the work in ways that were illegitimate, the museum shows a lot of leadership in looking to repatriate that work. So what does that mean? That means Museum of Fine Art Boston has returned works that were looted by the Nazis in the Holocaust. It means that they've returned works that were, cultural patrimony taken from indigenous American communities and tribes. It means that they've engaged in patrimony to Malaysia and Greece and Turkey when they found that they had like a 3,000-year-old necklace in their collection that was likely looted from a grave in Turkey, and they did the research and returned it. And so my approach and the strategy I put together here was, you guys have a commitment engaging in ethical restitution. You've done it here, 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 and here. That's admirable. There's one area in your collection where you haven't done it, and it's here. And it's kind of when you frame it to them like that, it's like, okay, so let me get this straight. Like, you're going to give the art back to, victims of the Holocaust. You're going to give it back to Native Americans. You're returning it to Greece and Turkey and India. The only place that you're not giving work back is to work created by enslaved African American. And of course, that's not their position. Now, they had never done it before. No one had ever brought a claim, and we can talk about why no one has ever brought a claim. But the point is when you're looking at engaging in work that's like groundbreaking, going to have an impact, the strategy is critical. This is not something that's like, hey, let's just throw something against the wall and see what it sticks. Like, one bad move on this, and like maybe it would have shut the door forever. And so the research that Ryan did in terms of gathering information about the different institutions that own the work was imperative. So.
Open this up for questions. I have questions, but I'd much prefer to give you the opportunity to engage with the speakers, or if the speakers have questions for each other. I know that this is actually the first time that they've kind of all come together in person. All their communication has been virtual up until this point. I want to thank Stancia for helping me with the mic. We have one roving mic. We are recording this, so if you have friends or colleagues that weren't able to come, we will be able to, send this out through LMU channels. And that's why we need to kind of use a mic for the questions so that they'll be picked up on the recording. Or I'm also happy to kind of relay the question via this mic. So, questions or comments? Thanks, Dan. Sorry to make you work here.
Hi, thank you. Somebody always has to be first to get the conversation started, right? My name is Elizabeth Drummond. I'm in the history department, and I want to thank you all for this really interesting panel. I actually have two questions, one for George and one for probably Ryan, but maybe not. We'll see. And it might not be a question that is something that you can answer. My question for George, for you, is about the legal framework that guides these kinds of cases potentially for restitution to descendants of enslaved peoples. There is a legal framework, for example, for the restitution of looted Nazi art or looted art by the Nazis, and NAGPRA governing Native American, but that doesn't exist with the descendants of enslaved peoples or with colonial issues as well. I mean, that's the issue in Europe, that they have laws that will mandate the return of looted art by the Nazis, but not of art that they looted themselves from their colonies. So that's my question for you, if you can talk a little bit about the legal framework. And then for Ryan, I'm really curious, if you, and you might not have really paid attention to this in your research, but how the museums that held David Drake's works, how their labels were written. So how did they talk about him, or in their own materials? Like, how did they actually talk about him and present him, and even talk about provenance or authorial aspects in terms of the creation? And if you saw some differences, I mean, there's a whole big, as Melody knows, right? There's a whole, and Kirstin, there's a whole big change in how museums are approaching their labels. But I'm interested to see what you encountered with an enslaved artist.
Sure. I noticed a lot of similarities between the various institutions. It seems like, and George, you can comment on this too, but it seems like a lot of museums and institutions, they recognize the work. They wrote very appropriately about it, and they recognize how monumental David Drake was and the work that he did and how unique it is. So far as provenance, though, they didn't comment so much on that. There wasn't a huge record of buying and selling, mostly because a lot of that is confidential. And some institutions did buy these through auctions, which is another layer of kind of bureaucracy that's hard to get through. But institutions know the work and why, and its import and why it's important. I think the closest piece to LA is in San Francisco, which I got to saw.
For now.
Yeah, for now, which I got to see not too long ago. But their literature on the work specifically was actually pretty amazing. Very respectful, very exhaustive actually, and kind of goes really in depth into why David Drake is important. So in that, I think it is surprising that some institutions aren't necessarily jumping on trying to make this right, make the work right, make it right for his descendants and the work that he made.
Can I just add something, Elizabeth? So it may come as a surprise to everyone in the audience, but provenance specialists are not always on the payroll of museums. It's oftentimes the role of the curator to look for these provenance histories on top of all the other tasks that they're asked to do. And so the MFA with designated provenance specialists can do that work, and not all museums have dedicated specialists. And LACMA, for example, right, our encyclopedic institution here in Los Angeles is currently in the process of hiring their first provenance specialist, one for the entire museum. That's all collections. That's China, India, right? The various countries in Africa, South America, Europe. And so that one person is responsible for finding the provenance histories of all of these works. And so you can imagine when doing this archival research, right, you need to know multiple languages, you need to know where to look, and that's where, you know, Ryan's skills were so important, because he is someone who thinks really critically and creatively. And so, you know, I'm cautioning you students not to rely on AI generative platforms so much, because these are skills that you need, right? So I'll get off my soapbox now, but.
I want to comment on this, on the second question, then I'll talk about the legal framework. There was something that was super curious to me. Most museums have a collections policy, right, that dictates like what type of work, not that they'll buy, but a lot of museums get their work through, you know, donation and gifts. And the collection policy covers any artwork that's coming into the museum, whether the museum's going out and paying for it, whether a donor is giving it as a gift, or whatever form of acquisition. And the majority of U.S. institutions, their collection policy makes clear that they will not knowingly, have enter into their collection works that have broken chains of title, right? Works that have been where, there was some illegitimate transfer, whether it was stolen or it was taken under duress. And it makes sense, right? It's like a pretty common policy. Like, we're not gonna bring anything in that, we think did not get here through a clean and legitimate way. So that's the policy. Yet you've got these museums who are bidding at auction for Drake's work, which the reason they're bidding for it is because it was created through enslaved labor, right? That's the significance of these jars. Like, that's why, like, they're beautiful and they're durable and there's poetry, but like what makes them unique is that, Drake was an enslaved person. And I can't square that. I can't square, like, wait a minute, your collections policy says you won't assess anything that, has gotten here illegitimately, yet you're bidding on works and you're buying works and you're accepting works that was created only through conditions of slavery. And like, I guess the only way you reconcile that is you say they don't consider, like, I think the issue is like they're not thinking it through and understanding how this violates the policy, but it's got to violate the policy. Like, this was work that was created under duress. So that's kind of on the provenance point. I will talk about the legal framework. So, I'm a lawyer by training. I graduated, proud graduate from Loyola Law School of LMU. I am not a litigator, so I don't fight in court. I don't sue people. I'm what you call a transactional attorney. I'm a deal lawyer, right? I negotiate and I make deals and I get stuff done like that. And so, in terms of a legal framework, that doesn't bother me if there's a legal framework or not, because my job is to like get a deal done. And it's great if you've got law on your side to help you get the deal done. But I'll tell you, in the Bruce's Beach case, we did not have law on our side to get that deal done. That was a transaction that we had to structure kind of very strategically and creatively. And so I mentioned that because, again, there's a lot of students here, and you got to think about like your entire toolkit, right? And your entire tool belt. And it's not just, hey, we want to get this pot back. Let's see, can we find a law that says we've got a right to? And if we don't, like, hey, sorry, it's too bad. It's like, okay, the law doesn't help, but what does help? Okay, well, there's ethical considerations. Museums have employees, they've got members, they rely on the public to like go and support. And so we've got, we've got like moral authority, and we've got public relations. Like, we've got a lot of tools that we can use, like when the law is not in our corner. The law in this area specifically to, so the law in this area like doesn't exist, and the adjacent laws, are nuanced and complex. And so, like, I've got legal arguments around this, and it gets into this like really kind of odd distinction and conversation of, well, was the work stolen or was the labor stolen? As if that should make any difference, right? The answer is both, right? The answer is both. But like, the point is, a lot of times when we're trying to solve a problem, we confine ourselves to like the obvious tools, and a lot of times those tools aren't helpful. And so we've got to think more strategically. Well, I'll wait to see if there's other questions.
I'm Dean Bryant Alexander, and I am completely over the moon with this panel. I'm over the moon with the consistent iteration and direct address to our students about their critical engagement with their work, and particularly the Department of Art and Art History, and of course this monumental, historic success of this engagement. So congratulations to all of you. George, I'm wondering about in relation to strategy, I'm wondering if you can talk about any points of resistance, right, of any individual gallery or museum that refused, right, to relinquish, to repatriate, to engage and be responsive on either the legal ground or the ethical ground or the moral ground, and all those other points of transaction that you engaged.
Yeah, thanks for raising that. There were folks who said no, right? There were folks, and here's the problem: they don't say no, right? They say like, oh, this is something we have to study, and we need to engage outside scholars, and we've got to engage our So they don't come out and say no, but you can kind of tell. But thankfully, we didn't have a lot of that because we were very strategic in where we started, and I think it's a lot easier now. Like, Museum of Fine Art Boston is like one of the most important art institutions in the country, if not like, in a lot of the world, and to have them demonstrate leadership and set the precedent here. And look, and here's the pitch I made to the Museum of Fine Art Boston. I said, I want to help you guys become superheroes, right? I said, like, I know you paid for this and you've invested in it, but let me tell you, like, the quality of the positive public relations and the goodwill that you're going to create by showing leadership here, you'd never have enough money to buy that goodwill and buy that PR. And I swear, like 2 weeks after we announced and we got the jar back, and these are the descendants. These are David Drake's great-great-great-grandchildren. 2 weeks after, I got a text from the head of provenance, and she said, I've been doing this work for 30 years at a number of art institutions throughout the country. I have never seen such a positive outpouring of support with people. Like, she said the next day there was a line out the museum. People wanted to come see the jar. The family, the jar was returned to the family, and the family wanted it to stay in the museum so that people could see it. And it has the label now that says who owns it, and it's owned by the David Drake Legacy Trust. But it's there, and she said, I keep looking for like the trolls and the naysayers, and she's like, they're not out there. So we talk about strategy. There's a couple of other areas where strategy was really critical here. There was someone alluded to earlier, the Benin bronzes. Has anyone heard of that? The Benin bronzes? Okay, I know. Benin refers to an ancient kingdom that's in present-day Nigeria, and I'm gonna screw the dates up, so you might have to help me with the dates. Late 1700s, early 1800s. Like, there was a British expedition that went and just completely like destroyed and massacred this kingdom, and they looted thousands of pieces of bronze art that are referred to in the art community as Benin bronzes. And what's significant is like the people of Benin, their metal work at this time, like in the 1800s, like was way ahead of Europe, right? Like the skill that they had, and you Google Benin bronze, you see these things are amazing. So this like massacre expedition where they looted, and these are like religious artifacts. They looted them. Most Benin bronzes now are in museums and private collections throughout Europe, some here in the U.S. In the past 2 decades, really starting maybe in the 1990s, there's been a global call of restitution of the Benin bronze. There's been calls, and I actually think France, the French government kind of stepped up first and took the lead, and the Smithsonian has agreed to return some. But here's where I'm going with this. Benin bronze are like these priceless artifacts that would sell at auction for like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And after the restitution movement, you could go on eBay right now and buy a Benin bronze for $2,000. The commercial value like plummeted. Why? Like, you're not going to buy one of these things if like somebody's going to knock on your door in 2 weeks and say like, you got to give that back, right? So it destroyed. And so why am I mentioning this? So I'm representing Drake's descendants, and we've got a plan. Like one of his jars, he set the U.S. ceramics art auction record, $1.56 million. Like, no piece of U.S. ceramic pottery has ever sold for that. Like, Drake holds that record. So we're going back and we're making restitution demands from institutions and from collectors. And what I'm worried about is like destroying the commercial value of the work, which is not the family's objective, right? The family doesn't want like to get it back, but to have it be worthless. And so, again, this is to the point of like using your training to like think around corners, to kind of think, okay, if we get this back, what's going to happen? And learning from things that have happened other. So what we developed, this was not only the first time in history that work created by enslaved labor has been returned to the descendants of the maker. We developed something else that has never been done before, and that is my strategy was to create 2 commercial markets for David Drake's work. We would have a market that is the legitimate market, and so work in the legitimate market is work that was acquired in partnership or through or with Drake's descendants. And so the Museum of Fine Art Boston had 2 of Drake's jars. They returned both of those jars to Drake's family. And then Drake's family turned around and sold them one jar back. And when they sold the jar back, they delivered something that we invented that doesn't exist, but they delivered a document called a certificate of ethical ownership. That jar now just got 5 times more valuable. And the idea is, if you, and so think about it, right? So you've got all these other institutions, these collectors, these individuals who have the jars, and my pitch to them is that jar is going to be worthless because you bought it illegitimately. And if you want it to be worth something, you need to come and engage with the family and get one of these certificates. Now that is legitimately owned, and your ownership is protected. So that's another and it's again this idea is we want to go and do something, but you got to think what are the consequences? What's going to happen? And the way we think about that, it's not that I'm brilliant and thought about it, but you look at, well, what happened last time somebody did something like that, and you saw you can buy a Benin bronze on eBay for $2,000. So that was kind of something else that was that's never existed before. And I remember the museum said I remember talking to the museum's lawyer, and they said I've never seen a certificate of ethical ownership. What is that? I was don't worry about it. It's important. And it's something we invented because we were thinking about what's going to happen. How's this going to play out?
I have a question, or just sort of I guess a comment for Melody, because I know that these are themes that come out in a lot of art history classes that we teach, issues of reparations or repatriation. But I know that Melody's research touches directly on these themes, and some of your classes deal very, very directly with them. And so I was hoping that you could put in a plug for the students that might be interested in these themes for some of your future classes.
I think I'm teaching the history of museums. Am I teaching that?
Not necessarily what's going to be scheduled
Oh.
next semester, but just some of the classes that you have taught that relate directly to
Well, as you say, all of my classes touch upon these issues because I am a specialist of South and Southeast Asia, and these are countries that were all once colonized, with the exception of Thailand. But even they were embroiled in colonial pursuits. So it's something that we deal with all the time. And, for those of you who are in the audience, particularly junior seniors, and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to find a job soon. What does this mean for me? I really do think that provenance research is going to be a much more important role in museums than it has been in the past. And it's because of these issues of ownership and that are coming to the fore in a way that they haven't before. Now, that being said, right, nations, individuals have asking for objects back for the last 200 years. But the rapidness with how people are asking for things to be returned is much elevated. Part of this has to do with the fact that objects are digitized. Part of this is because of issues of morality and ethics, right? Part of this is to do with the value of these objects. Part of this has to do with tribalism. I've seen more claims for the repatriation of artworks back to South and Southeast Asia, since certain individuals have come into office, because there is this sort of tribalism that is happening. Do I agree always? No, because I am a firm believer that art should be shared because it does foster empathy and a care for others. But what does it mean when you have encyclopedic museums that only exist in the global north, right? And so these are things that we talk about. So I'll put a plug in for a class I think I'm teaching. You let me know if I'm actually teaching it. I think I'm teaching the history of museums when I come back. I'm currently on sabbatical. And in this course, I'm sorry, are we teaching? Am I teaching? Oh, okay. I'll be teaching it at some point, but in the fall, I'll be teaching who owns art. And so we deal specifically with these issues. And we look at these issues of who should own art. And we look at it from the perspective of archaeologists, lawyers, dealers, curators, subsistence diggers, because no one ever cares what they think, right? And what I've seen, because I've taught this class for over a decade, is that our minds have changed about it, right? And I don't know how I feel, but our minds have changed about it, but things have become more complex. So, but at the end of the day, I hope that all of our classes, art history, I know for a fact that they do prepare you for a life of critical thinking. So I want to actually, if there's no questions, I want to posit a question to Ryan, which is, what was your biggest challenge in doing this project? And how could we have been better to prepare you to do this type of work?
I think if I took one of your classes, that would have helped. I think I kind of styled my education towards modernism and beyond. I never took any directed classes at African American art or really any American history, which it would have been really incredibly helpful. I definitely read Carolina Clay, which was a great book on David Drake. But I think I could have helped myself more there. I wouldn't blame it on the institution necessarily. But I guess I'll say what helped me the most was my junior-senior seminar. Looking at different approaches to critical thinking specific to art history. Dr. Damon Willick's classes and the research he encouraged was really, really, really helpful to me. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think if you're a junior and you are in the art history program, I would take your junior-senior seminar as quickly as you can, because I think it changed my perspective on everything I had learned previously. And I think the research it encourages, especially in the final paper, is definitely probably what helped me the most.
Question right
I do. I actually wanted to ask Ryan, what's next for you, if this has influenced, your trajectory? And then George, I'm really interested with the Bruce's speech and now with these material objects. What's next for you, or what can you see kind of on the horizon, other cases that can be made or negotiated?
Unfortunately for some of the graduates right now, the job market in the art world is a little soft. But that being said, I would love to get into the gallery world. I go to as many openings as I can. I'm an active collector, and this project specifically has influenced how I go about doing that. I've shifted my lens to hyper-local, looking at LA artists. I was telling George, LA artists in the 1960s and 70s. And I've been thinking about ways to think about making art more accessible, collecting-wise, to people who aren't established in their career, or people who don't have, you think of art collecting and you think of people who have gobs of money to spend on huge, amazing, once-in-a-lifetime pieces, but there is a market that is affordable, quote unquote, whether it's up-and-coming artists or established artists that people kind of overlook while they still have art historical significance. But yeah, I mean, this is my hobby. What I did for George is my hobby. I think my wife will tell you I'm constantly looking at the market. I'm constantly looking at auctions. The market specifically is where my interest lies. And
I'm really interested in the stories, like with the Bruce family, with Dave the Potter. I think it's so important that we preserve these stories, we understand the stories, we learn from them, we share them. I've started a nonprofit effort now. It's called the Black Land Loss Narrative Archive Project, and it's an effort to collect, preserve, and amplify stories of Black land loss throughout the country. I'm actually trying to have it housed here at LMU. That's just something I've always been interested and passionate about. You know, professionally, I've left the law now, and I'm focused on. I've got a venture that I'm focused on that. It's very much inspired by Bruce's Beach and the Bruce family. It's focused on accelerating access to home ownership by making home ownership and housing an employee benefit, right? To help people, you know, start getting on a fast track to housing and home ownership. So, but like the story preservation, and that is what I'm focused on. I do want to share, and I appreciate whoever put the picture up. I'll share one more. I think we have like 5 minutes. Yeah. There was one other, you know, so we talked about the fact that this was, you know, landmark ethical restitution case in terms of applying those principles to work created by enslaved Americans. We talked about the certificate of ethical ownership, which, you know, was a concept that really, you know, didn't exist or maybe doesn't exist, but exists now. You know, there's one other area that, you know, gives me a lot of pride in how we structured this, I call it a transaction. It feels like too small of a word to describe what happens here. And again, it goes back to this theme of like not being, you know, boxed in by what the law says or how the law works. But, and this picture reminds me of it. When you look at a lot of the ethical restitution cases, and specifically when you look at a lot of the litigation, what you see is there's a painting on the wall, and a descendant or a family member comes and says like, hey, that was stolen from my grandmother in the 30s, 40s. And there's a lawsuit, and the museum, you know, ends up taking the painting off the wall and returns it to the family. In most cases, that's the last time that painting's ever seen by the public again, because it enters a private collection. And then a lot of times, the very next thing you see is litigation among and between the family over like, we should sell it. I need to like. So I was very aware of that. And what this picture reminds me of that I should have mentioned before is something that we did differently when the museum returned the jars to the Drake family. Well, he wrote these 2-line poems that, again, I mentioned have like dual meanings. And one of his most famous poems, the lines read, I wonder where is all my relation? A friendship to all and every nation was the rhyme. And you read that and it's like you're not sure kind of what it means. You're not sure what to make of it. When you go back and you learn about Dave's life, he had 3 owners. And his second owner had hard economic times and had to sell off a bunch of the slaves that lived at the factory. And among the slaves who were sold off were Dave's first wife and children. And so this is like, you know, this like forcible separation of family. And so now you see Dave like, you know, writing this poem, I wonder where is all my relation, right? He's looking for his family. And when we got the jar back, the process that we agreed upon with the family was nobody's going to have the jar in the home. The jars are going to be lent to institutions so that the public can see them and learn from them. Any proceeds that are received from the sale of the work, so one work was sold back to Boston, it's going to sit in a fund, and it's going to be a fund that's available for Drake's descendants to pay for college and education and pay for homes to become homeowners. We launched a website. It's called descendantsofdave.org. Launched a website, and it's a call. This is not like the family gets the painting back and we're fighting over who gets to keep it. We're doing the opposite. We launched a website, and it said, if you think that you might be a descendant of Dave's, reach out. And we want to, and if it turns out you are, like, you're going to be a benefactor of this, right? So it's totally opposite model of what we see. And what I'll say is, like, it's inspired by the first line of his poem, right? He's asking, where's my family? And we're saying, like, oh, we're going to find him for you. So.
You know, I think on that note, that's a very nice concluding note. I want to just maybe thank our speakers again, and if there are additional questions, yeah. I know some people have to rush off to other meetings or classes, but maybe we can have just a few more minutes informally down here if you want to come down and you know, ask additional questions. But thank you all for coming, and have a great weekend.